Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our Come to Class session. I am Robin Cunningham, the Dean of Freshman Studies, and I'm very happy to be joined today by an esteemed colleague, Dr. Angela Weisl from the Department of English. And Dr. Weisl is going to review with you some of the content of a first-year English class. But before she gets started, I just would like to share some information about Dr. Weisl. She is the chair of our English department, which also hosts the creative writing majors and minors, the Irish literature minor, and the medieval and Renaissance studies minor, as well as overseeing our first year writing program that many of our students pass through. Dr. Weisl has been at Seton Hall for 25 years. Her PhD is from Columbia, and she has written several books, which she's most proud of co-writing one with a student, Medieval Literature, The Basics. Also, Dr. Weisl is an avid Yankees fan. She teaches yoga on the side, and she really appreciates fresh veggies and fruits in the spring and summer. So thank you again for coming. And I just want to remind you that there will be a question and answer function. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will get to as many of your questions as we can. So Dr. Weisl, thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming today and for coming to try out what a college class is like. Maybe it'll seem familiar to you from your own college classes, or maybe it'll get you excited for sending your kids off to college. Hope so. Maybe we can go on to the next slide. So I'm going to welcome you to English 1202, which is what many of your students will take in the second semester. It's Core English 2. It's the second half of our first year writing sequence. And I picked this because it's a little bit more in my wheelhouse than the first semester course. And it also gives us something sort of manageable to work with in the time that we have. So if we can go on to our next slide, I can just tell you a little more about the class. So English 1202 is a course in college level writing, just like College English 1, English 1201. The subject is literature, poetry, prose, drama, but the skills that it teaches are far more about thoughtful analysis, attention to detail, argument building, effective communication, and self-articulation, really reading, writing, and thinking. And students in English 1202 will read all sorts of great literature, poetry, prose, drama. They write 2 short essays and then an extended research paper. And that's usually done as an assignment sequence. So they do lots of pieces of it and put it together. And that allows students with an opportunity to see what they find the most interesting, to figure out ways to talk about it beyond simply saying, wow, that's interesting. And they end the course with a self-analysis. So they get the opportunity to figure out what they think they've spent the semester learning and what they can do that they couldn't do when they walked in the door several months previous. So if we can go on to the next slide, let's take a look at this text, and then we'll work with it the way we would in a typical 1202 class. So I chose this poem because it's short and I like it, and I teach it when I teach English 1202. It's by Sir Thomas Wyatt, and it was written in the 1530s, and the poem is Whoso list to hunt. Whoso list to hunt, I know where is an hind, but as for me, alas, I may no more. The vain travail hath wearied me so sore, I am of them that farthest cometh behind. Yet may I by no means my wearied mind draw from the deer, but as she fleeth afore, fainting I follow. I leave off therefore, since in a net I seek to hold the wind. Who list her hunt, I put him out of doubt, as well as I may spend his time in vain. And graven with diamonds and letters plain, there was written her fair neck round about, Noli me tangere, for Caesar's I am, and wild for the bold, though I seem tame. Now, my reading this aloud to you is not quite what would happen in a class. I would usually ask one of the students to read the poem aloud, just to practice self-presentation and to practice speaking aloud and to practice reading aloud something, since we'll often have to do that in our professional lives, whether it's from a PowerPoint slide like I'm doing now or from a prepared text. So give an opportunity for a student to volunteer or to get volunteered to read the poem aloud and let us all hear it. And then we would move on to some questions. So if we go on to the next slide, we can start exploring some of these questions. And the first thing I would probably ask students if there was any words that they they didn't know or that didn't seem familiar. And of course, ideally, they would have read the poem at home that night, the night before, and would have maybe looked these up, but it doesn't always happen. So we might touch some points that we found, particularly words like vain travail. What does that mean? The word travail meaning work or effort. Looking at the word hélas, it's sort of French for alas, and what that means. So we would touch any points in the poem where there was some unclarity and try to clear those up, just so we knew what the work was actually saying. And we might even connect to some of the strange language elements of the poem. Somebody might ask, for instance, why hind and wind don't rhyme. And we might talk about the ways that language had changed. The time Wyatt wrote the poem, they've been more similar, something like hind and wind. We can think about the ways that language changes, and there might be an opportunity even to think about the ways languages are changing right now. We didn't probably talk about Zooming things back in, say, February. Now we talk about Zooming all the time, or Googling things. Our language is in continuing state of change. So it's nice to look back at an older poem and think about the way some of those changes are taking place. I'd ask if students had any questions about the poem. Was there anything they wanted to know or anything they wanted to say? Who was Thomas Wyatt anyway? Presumably the book that they had read it out of would have had a little biography. Was there anything interesting they wanted to raise about him? And then we were to get into the form of the poem. What kind of a poem is this? And hopefully what the students would tell me is that it's a sonnet, and how they know it has 14 lines. And hopefully they'd also be able to tell me that it's a Petrarchan sonnet as opposed to an English sonnet, that even though it's in English, and they could tell because the rhyme scheme, so that the first 8 lines have the rhyme scheme A, B, B, A, B, B, A, and then the second 6 had a different variation, so that they would know that this was a a Petrarchan sonnet. And then we would think about what difference these things make. Why do we care about rhythm, meter, and form? Why do they matter? And some of the things we might talk about was the idea that this is a poem about hunting, that people are riding after this deer on horseback, and that meter of the poem that's in that standard iambic pentameter, whoso list to hunt, I know where is an hind, sort of echoes the form of hoofbeats. I mean, maybe you remember from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the guys running around with their coconuts going, that in a way that's the same meter of the poem. But we might also talk about the way that this meter is considered a standard form for English. It kind of matches the rhythms of English. And then we might think about why a sonnet? Why would we pick up this kind of a poem that is so tightly constructed and so crafted and so shows the fact that it's a poem at every turn? And we might think about why you might want to do that instead of something more naturalist that seemed a little bit more like speech or more like a natural rhythm. What is it about creating this little jewel in language that may be something that Wyatt is trying to do? And so if we went on to the next slide, we'd continue with some more questions about the poem, just to establish that we're all on the same page. Who's the speaker of this poem? Somebody's saying, whoso list to hunt, I know where is an hind. So who is I in this poem, and how can we tell? What do we know about this I? We know that this I is following this deer with great enthusiasm, but that it's not really getting him anywhere. He says, I follow her fainting. He is exhausted. He is tired out by this experience of chasing the deer. So we know that there's something unrequited about this experience for him. And he uses some metaphors about failure, like seeking to hold the wind in a net. So somebody who's frustrated, somebody who is unsuccessful at this goal of chasing the deer. We also might try to think about who is he speaking to? Because yes, of course, poems are written for everybody, and yet there's a way that he builds an audience into the poem. He says, whoso list to hunt, I know where is an hind. So who is he talking about? Who are the people who might want to hunt a deer in the context of this poem? And we can say that these are people who are courtly, who are wealthy, they're nobility. Only those kinds of people would hunt deer during the Renaissance period. We probably can guess that there are other men, that he's speaking to a primarily male audience. We could look for clues for that in the poem. And then we can think about who's not being spoken to. You know, this is a poem that really addresses a particular audience. So who's not in that audience? And probably most of us in the room in certain ways are not in that audience. So how do we then connect to this material? And then we would think about the central metaphor of hunting with the poem. We would really take it apart. Like, why hunting? How is hunting still a metaphor that we sometimes use for the pursuit of somebody we're attracted to? And why? Why do we think of it as being like a hunt? And why does this metaphor last so long? Why is it so attractive to Wyatt? Certainly he and his compatriots actually did this as an activity pretty often. We maybe don't so much. So why do we still continue with this metaphor? What is pursuing somebody we like have to do with hunting? Why does it call out similar elements? And why a deer? You know, what is noble or striking about the deer? Is this the same deer that's, you know, eating your vegetable garden right now, or walking down, you know, from the South Orange Reservation and wandering around the town? Probably not. And yet, in some ways, yes, it's a real deer and a metaphorical deer. And so, why do we want to use a deer as a metaphor? Besides the fact that that's one of the things they like to hunt. You know, it's not whoso lists to hunt, I know where is a giant wild boar. So what is it about a deer that conveys certain elements of love, of desire? And then we would think about why is the horse speaker so tired? He uses metaphors that convey exhaustion. He says he's seeking to hold the wind in a net. We would think about what that would mean. You know, take out our, you know, imagine a butterfly net and you're trying to catch something in it. Can you catch the wind in a net? Of course not. So why use that idea of impossibility to convey the way that he feels? And given that, why does he run after this deer anyway? He says, I leave off, therefore, since in a net I seek to hold the wind, but then he doesn't leave off. He keeps going. So what is it about this desire, this love that compels him to keep running, to keep chasing, even when he knows it's futile, even when he knows it's trying to catch the wind in a net? And to think about what that's like. I mean, you know, I wouldn't expect students to narrate all of their stories of being in love or desiring somebody, but maybe they could connect to that feeling a little bit, connect to that sense of wanting something you can't have and knowing you can't have it, but still wanting it. So there's certainly ways that this poem from 1500 can still speak to us in 2020. And then we would go on with some more questions on the next slide and get a little deeper into the poem. And I think this picture of this kind of noble deer with flower in her antlers is sort of fabulous and perfect for this poem. So I hope you're enjoying it out there. So we'll think about the structure and how that helps us. What happens in those first 8 lines of the poem? You know, whoso lists to hunt, I know where is an hind, but I can't really follow her, but whoever wants to follow her, I put him out of doubt that his search or his chasing of this deer will be in vain. So what goes on there? There's the metaphor of the hunt and the impossibility of it. And then we switch to the next 6 lines, the sestet. And those 2 terms, octave for 8 and sestet for 6, match the 2 parts of the poem, and start thinking about what's going on in that second part. First of all, what's with the Latin quotation? We've got noli me tangere. It means don't touch me, but specifically it comes from the Bible. And of course, Wyatt and his friends would have read the Bible in Latin. And it's the moment where Thomas sees Christ on the road to Emmaus. And Thomas says, oh, you're not dead after all. And Christ says, don't touch me, right? Noli me tangere. So this would certainly echo for the people reading the poem in his time. So we would think about maybe why he wants to use that illusion, that untouchable divine figure. And then why have it in Latin too? It makes it sound fancier. It gives it a kind of authority. It does echo the Bible more strongly. So what does it do to have this quotation, this don't touch me, in another language? Does it make it more distant from the poet, more distant from the speaker, more distant from the audience too, making her, acquiring her even more impossible? And then we go on with some more questions in the next slide. We're getting deeper and deeper. We've got another lovely Renaissance deer here. It says, noli me tangere, for Caesar's I am. Well, who's Caesar? You know, first of all, the name Caesar echoes Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, the emperors of Rome, but there aren't emperors of Rome in 1530. So who is possibly Caesar? What is the speaker's relationship to Caesar? And then we might go back to Wyatt's biography. So Thomas Wyatt was a courtier during the time of Henry VIII. He was somebody who was often very much in favor and often so much not in favor that he was in prison. So he was in and out of prison, and he fell in love with Anne Boleyn, who you might remember as Henry VIII's second wife. She's one of the beheaded ones. So being in love with the king's wife is probably somewhat dangerous during this period, but also the minute she becomes the king's wife and the king's lover, she's pretty unattainable for the average hunter who is desiring her. So maybe we can look to the biography to get some idea of the relationship that Wyatt perceives between himself as a speaker and Caesar, who becomes the kind of untouchable sign of empire and kingship as an individual person. So we know that the deer belongs to Caesar and seems wild to hold, though and wild for to hold as in untouchable or unholdable, even if she appears tame because she's wearing this collar. And we probably think a little bit about the collar too, because she's wearing a collar of diamonds and topazes. So what does it mean to put a collar on an animal? You know, you put a collar on your pet dog, why? So you can hang on to them, so you can put a leash on them, so you can put a tag and say they belong to you on them. So we might think about the collar there and what kinds of statements about her being owned and being claimed that it conveys. But then what's the difference between the collar that your pet dog has and a diamond and topaz collar that says Nole me tangere? So we can use things that are familiar to us, try to connect to this poem from the past. And we can also use this biography to get a sense of his feeling that he can't give up his desire, but there is no way to achieve it. So once we've kind of worked our way through all the details of the poem and a lot of close reading, thinking about specific words, specific images, specific ideas, specific choices, we can think about the larger question, like, okay, what does this thing mean? What does Wyatt think about love, women, desire? What's he trying to say about it? We can ask ourselves that classic "so what" question. Why are we still reading something that was written in 1530? So what? What does it have to say to us? So we might think about the ways we think about desire and love and pursuit, and how those might connect to what Wyatt is saying. We know that he's saying that this is a kind of desire he can't stop giving into, even though it's hopeless. So we might think about the idea of unrequited love and what that feels like and how he conveys it, how successful he is at conveying the idea. Do we like the poem now that we know all the details and how they work together? And then finally, if we go on to the next slide, we might think about how we could approach this for a short writing assignment. Because the course is, after all, a writing class. The major set of skills from the class to take away are developing writing. So how might we use a little writing assignment to think about this poem? So I would give the students this other poem by Francis Petrarch, and he wrote it in Italian. So I might ask, if I have students in the class who read Italian, if they'd be willing to read it aloud in the original. I can read Italian, but often my students read it a lot better than I do. So it'd be fun to hear them read it in the original and get a sense of what it sounds like. And then I'd offer them this translation. A white doe in the green grass appeared to me, with two golden horns between two rivers, in the shade of a laurel, when the sun was rising in the unripe season. So pleasant proud was its appearance that I left my work, and like a miser in whom the pleasure of hunting the treasure mitigates the inherent vexations, I followed the hind. Let no one touch me, she bore written with diamonds and topazes round her lovely neck. It has pleased Caesar to make me free. The sun had reached midday when my eyes, weary but not satiated with gazing, I fell into the water and the hind disappeared. So now Wyatt claims that he's translating this poem in Whoso List to Hunt, but we can tell that it's not really a direct translation. There's a lot in Wyatt's poem that's very different from Petrarch. So what I would ask the students to do is, in a couple of paragraphs, discuss the differences that they see. What are the things that stand out to them as being different? Is the deer different? Is the narrator different? Is the plot, such as it were, different? Is the feeling different? Is the attitude different? Is it saying something different? So to talk through the differences that they notice and see, being as specific and detailed as possible. So one point they might make is that Petrarch doesn't quote the line in Latin. He has it in Italian and then it's translated into the English. So that's a difference. So to look really, really closely and see what they feel is different. How do Wyatt and Petrarch in these two short poems convey such a different idea of love? So they would take the very specific details and evidence to draw a larger conclusion about the difference between what the two poems say and how those little details really create those differences in meaning and create different ideas about love and desire. They would want to make sure they actually said what they think each poem's idea about love and desire are. That would be an important thing. So a variety of skills are clearly being asked for in this writing assignment: close reading and careful reading, attention to detail, comparison and contrast, and then what Sherlock Holmes calls inductive reasoning, right? He says you take your evidence and you draw material or conclusions from it. So an act of induction, a particular variety of reasoning or argument making, where you work from a variety of evidence and then you say what it means. You don't hypothesize something and then produce the evidence, but you produce the evidence and then draw the conclusion from it. And so this would allow students to take all of that close work that we did with the poem and actually apply it to something, through a larger critical thinking exercise in doing this assignment. So that would be how a class would be shaped. Not every class would lead to a writing assignment, and this would be something they might do briefly in their journals or might do in some kind of a Blackboard post. They wouldn't necessarily do it as a formal essay that would be turned in, but it would be a good practice for the kinds of formal essays they would then write, because in their longer research paper and in the two short essays that they would write for the class, they would certainly need to practice these kinds of skills. So this would be the shape of a 1202 class. We would start with the text and we would end up with some conclusions about it and think about it in the context of other works. We'd also like to think about it in the context of our own experience and the ways that something from the past can connect to us in the present, and how it can demonstrate some interesting issues that are going on with us now, like the ways that language changes. So that's my material for you today. And I look forward to answering any questions you might have about first year writing, about college writing, anything you want to know. So, thank you. And maybe we can end the slides.
Thank you, Dr. Weisl. I appreciate that. I'm sure the parents in our audience noticed that a lot of this class was a discussion with open-ended questions. Why this? What about that? How do you feel about this? So I think the parents need to take note that this is very typical in a college classroom. There's a lot more emphasis on your students' thoughts and their own reactions to the content. It's not just black and white answers. It's whatever direction the student may want to go in based on the discussion. So it's a very much more open-ended dialogue type of format in many of our college classes. Something that Dr. Weisl said also was to think about the larger questions. And this is something that I think is very common at Seton Hall in many of our classes, and certainly English, to think about the larger questions. Not only what is this poem saying to you in this moment, but how can this apply to social situations or personal situations? So I think this was a great example of what goes on in a first year course. So Dr. Weisl, we are getting some questions. And one of the first ones is, my student is a business major, and why would my student then have to take a poetry class? Go ahead.
All right, well, you know, it's a good question, and a question I think we get fairly often. And I think there are a lot of answers to that question, and I've been thinking about it. And one of the things that stands out to me is, you know, we really are living in a world where information has gotten strange. I mean, people talk about our being in a post-truth world. We always are hearing about fake news. I think having the kinds of skills that reading something like poetry teaches you, that attentiveness to detail, that carefulness about language, that sense of how pieces of a sentence relate to each other, the ways that words can mean more than one thing, really equips people very well to negotiate this world that we're living in. You know, somebody who can read poetry well is not going to be deceived by anything, whether they're being presented with a document, a memo, some sort of internet story, facts, figures, whatever they may be, that somebody who has this kind of careful reading skills really is very well positioned to make sense out of what's in front of them and not get led down sort of inaccurate paths, not get convinced by something that's clearly not true, not have the sense, or even just to have the sense of figuring out whether something is real or not. And even, I think, importantly, to be able to sort of see what's on the surface of the document and then what's below the surface. So to understand elements like tone, which are often very challenging, read into. I mean, we all have gotten the email that we look at and can't quite tell what we're supposed to make of. And I think having the kinds of reading skills that you develop from reading poetry position you very well to figure out what to make of those kinds of things that are often very opaque. It also really develops our critical thinking skills, that movement from very specific kinds of art details to a larger conclusion about what something means really do help us become much better critical thinkers, whatever universe we're applying our critical thinking in. So in the business world, critical thinking is an incredibly valuable skill. So that these really position the student well, whether their future is in business or their future is in arts administration or their future is in marketing or in nonprofit work, to know what's in front of them and know how to do important things with it. But I would also say too that it helps you know people in a way. We work with lots of different kinds of people. We work with different people from different places in the world, different cultures from our own, different experiences from our own. And literature really introduces you to all sorts of different kinds of people and allows you to get to know them and have a sense of how to communicate with them before you actually go out into the real world and start doing that. So it has value there too. And people always talk about this idea of being well-rounded. And I'm not entirely sure what well-rounded means, except that you have a very broad sense of all the kinds of things that go on in the world around us and the ways that those are often very varied, that our own experience isn't always somebody else's experience. And those are useful skills in any universe as well, whether it's for a conversation with somebody who is higher up in an organization than you, and with your ability to know things and navigate them, whether it's simply to give you a sense of how to have that conversation in the first place. So those things I think are really valuable. But I think there's another side to it too. I mean, certainly there is all of this focus on reading and writing skills in the workplace. But we live in a very complicated world, and I think these past several months have brought that home to us in every possible way. And literature is often a place to see how people have reacted to similar situations, to find comfort, to get advice, to feel connections to somebody who's gone through it. So I think that it works for us on a lot of different levels, and it can be valuable professionally and skill development, but it can also be incredibly valuable in just developing your soul as a human being and really connecting to the world around you and people in it, because you have access to all sorts of responses to things that really come as much from the soul and the heart and the spirit as the mind. So I think that poetry has lots of value. And I was talking to a student right before this, and she said, I always think about the things I read in my first year writing class. And I think about them all the time, and maybe your student will too.
Thank you, Dr. Weisl. That was a great answer. Another question is a little more practical. With us facing the idea of having high flex courses in the fall, how will you and other professors get your students to be engaged in the class and participate in the class? What will be the challenges for students to participate?
I think there will be challenges. I think we're all thinking about what those are, and we're certainly on the faculty side developing our technology skills to navigate the HyFlex model. And we certainly had some good preparation in the spring for working with students online. There are a lot of ways for students to participate and to engage. So there's the standard model. I ask a question, my students who are sitting there in the room respond. There's even the model where I ask a question and my students sitting in the room and coming in over the live feed answer those questions. You know, there's that little hand raising function in Teams, then they can put their hands up just the way students in the room can. But we also have other methods. There's a chat function where students can answer questions there. So if I say, okay, everybody, we just read Who So Lists to Hunt. What do you think Wyatt thinks love is? Put your answers in the chat. Everybody can put their answers in the chat, and then they can comment on each other's answers. Or they can use our course management system, Blackboard. We have a discussion board feature in there. We can post the questions and they can all respond to them there. So it does take a little bit more intent and a little bit more attention, I think, to be engaged in HyFlex conversations, and we'll all be learning together and figuring it out. But there are all sorts of technologies and tools that allow participation from students who might feel awkward raising their hand on a screen, but will happily type their thoughts into the chat, and then I can have access to them, and so can their friends in the room, and can respond to them. They can, of course, raise their hands and even have a conversation with somebody in the room because the technology will allow that. So if one student thinks Wyatt is really silly in his pursuit of the deer and the other one thinks he's really admirable, they can have that conversation across platforms. They can make that work. So I think that the part that's going to be the most challenging is for the students who are on their screen day, making sure that they stay engaged. And so it will certainly be my job and my colleagues' job to find ways to have students be able to be active. And so again, using chat, using Blackboard, having people do polls. There are all sorts of ways for people to get engaged and participate. And so it's just up to them to not be distracted, but that's true when you're in the room too. If your laptop's in front of you, you might want to check your email, or you might want to stare out the window. I think I stared out of the window at the trees changing color in Vermont through half of my freshman English class because it was so pretty. But we all have to fight our own tendencies towards distraction and really bring our focus to the room. And it's our job as professors to create lots of mechanisms for that to happen, and to be really, really attentive to our students and to really be in touch with them to make sure that they're being engaged. And I think on the student side, it's a little bit their job to be in touch with us if they're having a hard time navigating any part of the class so that we can work with them to make it work better. But one thing I do like about the technological side is that the shyest students are still willing to write an answer down. So we can engage them in ways that are often hard in a classroom, particularly a classroom where you've got some people who are very comfortable participating and like to talk. So it can really offer some advantages as well as some challenges, and I'm excited about those.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So another question is about the Writing Center. If you could speak a little bit about what the role of the Writing Center is. Can all students go there to use its resources? And is it recommended? Is it mandatory or optional? Thank you.
Yeah, we have a terrific Writing Center. And it's run by Dr. Aruna Sanyal, who is very, very invested in making sure that our Writing Center keeps going, whatever teaching model gets thrown at us, and whether we're in person or remote. So there will be both in-person and remote tutoring available. We require that students go once each semester in first-year writing, just so they experience what it's like to get to work one-on-one with someone on their paper, because that can be incredibly valuable, but they might feel shy about it, or they might not automatically go themselves. And many students find that it is such a great way to be supported and to develop their writing that they go more often voluntarily. Sometimes if they are dealing with a writing issue that doesn't get addressed a lot in the class as a whole, a professor might recommend that they go more often. But the Writing Center is completely available for students in any class at any time in their college career. So if they really find it valuable as first-year students, they can continue to go as sophomores and seniors. And if they stay for grad work, they can keep going as grad students. We have peer tutors who are sophomores through seniors who are successful writers. They're not just English majors. We have business majors and bio majors and nursing majors and diplomacy students who tutor. We also have faculty and graduate tutors. So depending on what the student feels like he or she needs, we can meet those needs. So if somebody is really just struggling with grammar and sentence development, we have tutors who are happy to work with them on that. The Writing Center itself offers some grammar workshops where students bring papers and really just focus on grammatical issues. But there also are tutors who are very excited to work on idea development, on expansion of ideas, on negotiating the use of outside evidence like secondary sources. And this can be true whether it's in first-year writing or for a biology class where students are putting together lab reports. You know, as long as it's a writing issue, there are people there who will be there to help. So it's wonderful. It's free tutoring. It's open into the evening. Now with online tutoring, people can tutor at all sorts of different times and all sorts of different availabilities. And it really is there to provide any kind of writing support that students feel they need, and some reading support too. So if a student feels like they, are just having trouble figuring out how to think about the material that they're reading and get that ideas about it down on paper, the tutors are happy to do that as well. So it's open starting the second week of the semester. It's free. There are lots of hours, so students can really use it however it's helpful to them. And again, we require it once each semester just so they get in there and try it out. And if they find it works, they're welcome to go all the time or as often as they feel it's going to be useful. And they can bring a paper that they've written that they're revising. So if they didn't do as well as they would have liked and the professor allows revisions, the tutor will help them with those. They can bring a draft and help take it to the final, ideas and help take those to the paper. They can bring an outline. So really at any stage in the writing process, tutors are there to help and excited to do it.
Thank you, Dr. Weisl. Some parents have mentioned that, in anticipation of college, time management will certainly be a new strategy for their students to master. And of course, we've all heard about a syllabus. Mm-hmm. So could you spend a couple minutes, please, just explaining what is the point of a syllabus and what is a student's responsibility around a syllabus? Thank you.
So a syllabus is a combination of a variety of things. Sometimes people call it a contract for the course. So let's explore that idea a little bit more when I tell you, sort of talk you through what's on a syllabus. So a syllabus will have a course description generally, so the students sort of know what the class is about. It will have some learning outcomes or goals for the class. So what does the instructor think that the student should be aiming to get out of the class? So what are the things that will be focused on? What are the skills that the student might walk away with at the end of the semester? It will also have information about the grading policy. So what counts for how the percentages. It will have policies like attendance, plagiarism, participation, engagement. So any kind of policy that might be important for the class will be on there so that the student should know exactly what the expectations are. And it can be as small and minor as we expect you when you're coming in on screen to have your camera on, although you should feel free to blur or use a background if you want to. If there's an issue with that, please speak with the professor. It can be as expansive as we expect you to participate fully and respect your colleagues, and so those can be a little bit more impressionistic. Others can be really numbers. Your papers count 50% of your grade participation, 20% exam, 10% quizzes, 10% writing center, 5%. That didn't add up to 100. I'm an English professor, so they never add up to 100. We really do make sure our grades add up to 100. Don't worry. It's just hard for us in a way that it wouldn't be for my math colleagues. So it's got all of the policies laid out very clearly. And then it will also have a schedule of readings. So what are we reading on what day and what's due? So if, for instance, I had given you a syllabus, it would say 4 Tuesday, June 23rd, Thomas Wyatt, Whoso List to Hunt. And it would also say then for the following class, Wyatt writing assignment due. So it's a schedule of the readings, the activities, and the due dates for papers. Usually those things are subject to change. They can be changed by snow days usually in the spring semester at the beginning, but sometimes in the fall semester at the end. They can be changed by the fact that the class got so excited about something that the professor felt he would benefit from taking 2 days on it instead of just one. It can be changed because students really are having some trouble with an assignment, so we want to give them a little more time. So it can be changed because the students as a group sort of say it would be really helpful to us if we could have this due at a different time because we're all chemistry majors and we have a huge exam that day. So some things in the syllabus are subject to change. Policies are generally not subject to change. The course description doesn't change a whole lot. The outcomes are really how the course focuses itself. So students should refer to the syllabus for all of that useful information. They should refer to it for the professor's office hours, when the professor is available and how. They should refer to it for the attendance policy to make sure that they're keeping on top of that and making sure they're not missing classes more than they should be. They should refer to it for what they're supposed to read for a given day and what they're supposed to turn in on a given day. The actual writing assignments themselves are not usually in the syllabus. They're usually separate. And I will also say that the syllabus is posted in Blackboard, which is our course management system. So students should have access to it all the time. So it's really the how to get through your class document. And the idea that it's a contract is that professor volunteers or offers to do certain things, and then the student then agrees to do their part. And the syllabus is where that's essentially negotiated and spelled out. Some classes, students will actually sign syllabi, depends on the instructor. But in either case, this is what the agreement that we have with each other, that I will deliver this content and you will do this work, and then we will have a successful semester. So the syllabus is really very important. And so if students have any questions about the syllabus, if there's anything in it they don't understand, they really should ask their professor before they find themselves running amok of something. So if they don't know, what paper due today means, which paper or, which part is due, they need to ask. And if they don't understand a policy, they need to ask. And we are all very happy to explain our syllabi. Very, very happy to, because we want everybody to feel successful and do well. And not run into problems like missing a lot of classes or not turning in work on time or any of those things. So if there's any lack of clarity in the syllabus, the student should ask, and the professor will be very happy to clarify. And sometimes that might mean a little rewriting. I'll admit I've had to rewrite some things, even as an English professor. I've had to rewrite them for clarity, but we want to be very clear with our students, and this is the place where we really lay out and spell out what we're going to be doing in the class together. So anything that they don't understand, they should ask. And that's true across the board, of course. It's not just true about the syllabus. We are very friendly at Seton Hall. It has the reputation of the kind of school where people hold the door for each other. It was one of the first things I was told when I came to Seton Hall. We're the kind of campus where people hold the door for each other. And it's true. Everybody here is really invested in your student's success. But they expect the student to be a little bit invested too, and to ask the questions and to express concerns when they have them, so that we can help them do their very best and have the best time that they can too. And the syllabus is kind of the document of that.
Thank you, Dr. Weisl. I think we have time for just one more question. I'd like to remind the audience that there is a session at 3 o'clock on housing. So if you'd like to attend that, that will start at 3 o'clock. The last question out of the question and answers, you mentioned office hours. What are they, and why would a student attend an office hour? Thank you.
So office hours are almost literally what they sound like. They're when we're in our office. Now, in the fall, some of that will be when we're in our office, and some of it will be when we're available for meetings on Teams. But at the same time, it's when professors are specifically available. We sometimes are available other times. We can often extend our office hours to meet a student who's not able to get there because they have another class or they have other commitments or they work. But those are the hours that we specifically will be available. And why would a student come to office hours? Well, the students come to my office hours because I have a bowl of chocolate in my office and they want to eat it. And I also have the office stuffed animal and they want to play with it. But they also come to my office hours if they have questions, if they want help, if they want advice. And so questions can be, I didn't understand what we talked about in class today, or I understood that we talked about citation, but there were some things I wasn't clear about, or I read your comments on my paper and some of them didn't make sense to me, and now I have to take it from draft to final and I'm not sure how to do that. Or you said we could revise our papers. I didn't feel like mine went very well. What can I do to make it better? So it's an opportunity to talk about all of those class-related things. Or I really, really loved that poem. Can we talk some more about some things that didn't come up in class about it? Or my favorite book is this. Can I talk to you about it because I love it? Any of those things. It's also an opportunity to talk to us about any kind of advisement they might have. Like, I really like my writing class and, maybe I'd like to take some more. What classes would be good? Should I consider a writing minor? Should I consider an English minor? If I'm thinking about maybe changing my major, what would be a good idea if I want to go to law school? So we can certainly try to help students with career advice, long-term advice, senses of how what they're doing in college might fit with any long-term plans that they have. I'm a business major. Why do I have to read poetry in your class, Dr. Weisl? We can have that conversation. So it's an opportunity for us to talk to our students about anything that they really would like to talk about. Now, we're not their parents. We're not, in any position to talk to them about life things, but if they need help with those, we can help steer them to those places. We can help them find who on campus can really help them with any kinds of non-academic struggles they might be having. But we're certainly open to talking with students about any kind of academic concerns that they're having, any troubles they're having with their time management. A lot of us have, overcome our own problems with time management and might have some good suggestions. So it's really there for everything from very specific questions about course material and course success to bonding. As I said, I'm the chair of the English department, so a lot of students know me for various kinds of reasons, whether they've had to come and talk through transfer credit or whatever, and they just like to come in and have a cup of tea and have a conversation and touch base and talk about what they're thinking about doing for the summer. And so office hours are for that too. We are not necessarily our students' friends, but we certainly want to be friendly, mentors, connected to our students in ways that help them do what they want to do with their lives, with their college experience, and even sometimes their afternoon. So now you're going to tell your students to all come by when they need chocolate, and please do. I'm delighted to see them anytime.
Okay. Dr. Weisl, thank you so much for your time today. I think this was a wealth of information for all of us, and we really appreciate it. As a former English major, I certainly recommend English classes and English majors, English minors. So encourage your students to stop by the English department or reach out to Dr. Weisl. So that's it for us. We thank you all for attending, and go Pirates. Thank you.